Hello, and welcome to today's conversation, Recruiting and Retaining Talent in the New World of Work. I'm Bennett Richardson, President of Protocol. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our partners at Pluralsight for making today's event possible. At Protocol, we aim to arm you as decision makers in technology, business, and policy with actionable news and analysis to help you do your job. The Great Resignation has shaken up the tech industry in many ways. Employees are leaving their jobs without securing future employment, and half of workers are at least thinking about leaving their company this year. Not to mention, tech workers have more bargaining power than ever. How do you compete for top tech talent today? And what are the best ways to hold on to your employees in this new labor market? In today's event, we'll hear from a panel of talent and workplace experts as they discuss the most innovative ways to recruit and retain great employees. We're so glad you could tune in today. If you're not already subscribed, don't forget to sign up for Protocol Workplace and the Protocol family of newsletters at protocol.com/newsletters. To kick things off, I'm excited to introduce Aaron Skonnard for an executive conversation on how companies should make the transition from consumers of talent to creators of talent. Aaron's the co-founder and CEO of Pluralsight, a leading workforce development company. For Aaron, teaching technology has been a lifelong pursuit. He's been at the forefront of the skills development industry for nearly 2 decades and leads a team that helps thousands of companies around the world close skills gaps and build winning tech teams. Aaron, welcome.
Thanks, Bennett. It's great to be here.
Appreciate you being here. Pluralsight, unique vantage point that you all have on both the Great Resignation and the growing skills gap. What have you observed as the most powerful factors driving tech employees to stay with or to join an organization?
Well, first, I would say this is the craziest labor market I've ever seen in the last 30 years of my career and the last 20 years of running Pluralsight. The Great Resignation, or whatever you want to call it, is just a massive, massive challenge. And we talk to customers about it every day. Attrition in the IT industry right now is over 13%, highest of all industries. And it's not uncommon for me to talk to companies who are seeing as much as 20 to even 30% attrition levels in the last year. And when we survey those customers and try to understand what's behind it, like the thing we're now seeing with our customers is that attracting and retaining qualified talent is now job number one in their organizations. It's a boardroom and CEO priority. It's just as important now as revenue and cybersecurity threats, and you have to take it seriously. And the trends aren't really changing. It's not over. A recent IEEE report shows that as much as 72% of today's IT workers are planning to quit their jobs this year. And along with that, the number of developers applying for open positions is decreasing. It actually decreased by about 18% over the last few years. So this tech skills gap you mentioned up front is only getting bigger. And why are they leaving? 95% cite career development as the primary reason for shifting jobs. Comp is obviously tied to career development, but comp alone isn't enough. So the question is, I think, how do you tackle it as a company today? And I think some companies think we're in a phase like this post-pandemic phase, is going to end eventually, and then we'll be beyond it, we'll be past it. But I've got news for anyone thinking that way. This is the new normal. We're already in it, and companies have to embrace it. They have to adapt, and they have to evolve their talent strategies. And really, probably one of the most powerful ways companies can do that, Bennett, is to shift from being just consumers of talent into becoming creators of talent. It's a shift in philosophy, a shift in overall organizational culture. This means you strategically focus on developing talent and not just hiring talent. And one practical way companies can do that is by creating internal developer academies, internal cloud academies, or cyber academies to reskill team members who want to be part of the tech future. And when you do this, team members become much more engaged. It drives morale boost across the company. And if your team members are engaged, and they have opportunities to learn and grow, it will address this issue head on.
That's great insight. And I wanted to sort of zoom in on your last point there.
Yeah.
So often when folks think about, labor crunch and labor shortage, it's always focusing on looking outside for new talent. You all put, as you mentioned, a big emphasis on skill building and investing in a company's existing talent. Talk to us about that shift in mindset and the benefits of that approach.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why it is a benefit is because it's financially better for the company. And it's also better for the team members. It drives better culture. So why is it financially better for the company? Well, it's less expensive to retain than to hire. I think most of us know this, and it's been proven out over the years. Losing a tech employee can cost a company up to 150% of their salary in terms of just sheer cost to replace. And growing and promoting people from within, we know, drives better engagement, which ultimately drives better retention over time. And remember, like what I said just a few minutes ago, why are people leaving? Because they're looking for career growth. The faster you can provide career growth for people, the better off you'll be. So it's a massive win-win when a company can prioritize skill building and talent development while also focusing on closing the tech skills gap at the same time. And frankly, I mean, I think right now, just given the labor market we're in, regardless of whether or not it's a financial benefit or a cultural benefit, I think it's becoming a company imperative. Like, if you don't do this, like, you will not survive. Last October, there were a record-breaking 4.8 million open tech jobs across the U.S. The IT space added an average of 13,000 new IT roles every month last year. And remember, the number of developer applicants for those roles decreased by 18% at the same time. So in this new labor market, to survive, you cannot rely on hiring alone anymore. Like, you have to think strategically about how you're going to take control of this and create a better future for your company internally. So let me just give you an example of a company that's done this at Pluralsight. One of our customers, The Hartford, which is an insurance company with about 20,000 employees, they partnered with us to create an internal developer academy they called Learn to Code. And they market that program to internal claims adjusters and underwriters, non-tech roles today. And they leverage a combination of our digital skills development platform along with cohort-based learning experiences in the classroom within the company. And over the past 4 cohorts, they've created 60 new software developers within the company from non-tech backgrounds. That's just one small example of how a company can take control of this. And at the same time, it boosts morale, provides forward and future mobility for people who really want to be part of this tech future. So in the end, if you want to win in today's world, I believe you can't focus on hiring alone. You have to build it. You have to build your own talent.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that's a really interesting example. So often when we think about career development, it's that vertical linear career development, but obviously there are some lateral opportunities to do that as well. Before we move over to our panel, we've got an audience of tech and business executives listening in today, tuning in, who are trying to solve these problems at their organizations. What's one piece of advice you would give companies looking to invest in upskilling their teams and their workforce?
Yeah, in the tech domain specifically, when you focus on upskilling or reskilling, like the example I gave would be an example of reskilling across roles. Upskilling would be, going up role. Regardless of which type of program you're taking, or which type of approach you're taking, you want to be strategic and programmatic in your approach. So that means you've got top level support with the CEO, your executive team driving the importance of these initiatives. And you want to align your tech strategy with your skills strategy. So like creating that alignment at the top levels of leadership across the company, getting company-wide buy-in and support is like priority number one. And then focusing on the most important technology domains up front. Like today, that might look like cloud computing. It might be cybersecurity, AI, machine learning. Most of our companies, one of those three domains, if not all of them, are like top priorities right now. And you want to hit those head on with deep commitment and focus, making it possible for anyone in the company to upskill or reskill into those roles that are so critical for the future. And if you do it in a very programmatic way, like a data-driven way, that would have you first build a skills inventory to understand the skills you have across the company right now, leverage that data to then expose the skill gaps that exist, and then develop customized targeted programs to close those gaps over time. You want to use the best content, the best learning modalities, hands-on learning, so you can get real-world experience as you're learning in these programs, and leverage these cohort-based approaches as well to accelerate outcomes and guarantee outcomes by a specific moment in time. If you make that learning experience a guided, data-driven, human-supported journey, you will find success. Bottom line, I think it's about being strategic, making it a priority. Don't outsource it. Like all strategic things, you want to do this in-house and make it part of your future. And if you invest in your teams, it's better for business, it's better for leaders, and it's better for individuals. And if people want to learn more about what we do at Pluralsight on this point, just check out pluralsight.com/protocol for more info.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Super valuable and important parting thoughts there. And I think your point about making that programmatic and data-driven, not only so that you can address the right areas, but really broaden opportunity across the company is a great point. So thanks again for kicking us off today, and to Pluralsight for the partnership.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So now, folks, we'll move into our panel. I'm excited to bring up Amber Burton, Protocol Workplace Reporter, and our moderator for today's conversation, to introduce our panel. Amber, over.
Thanks so much, Bennett. As Bennett shared, my name's Amber Burton, and I'm a workplace reporter here at Protocol. And I'm excited to be gathering here for a conversation with our panel of experts today. And we're going to talk about recruiting, retention, and all about the Great Resignation and how it's really shaken up the tech industry as a whole. So, we're going to talk about what's working, what's not, and just generally opine about how tired we are of the term Great Resignation. Maybe that's just me. But before we get started, I'd love for you to, get to know who all of our panelists are today. We're going to jump into introductions. Jennifer, how about we start with you? Can you introduce yourself?
For founders, hiring managers, recruiters, really building the strong foundation from the get-go. Besides that, I've been head of people. I do a lot of writing on all things tech culture, startups, and now the Great Resignation, apparently.
Great. Zohra, can you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, Amber. Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Zohra Yafai. I lead global talent acquisition for Cisco, talent acquisition and internal mobility, internal movement as well. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. And Brian, how about you next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Elliott. I'm the leader of a group called Future Forum. We're a research-based consortium backed by Slack. We do research into knowledge workers around the globe to help understand habits and practices and what's working and what's not for people.
Great. And Anna, bring us home.
Hi, Amber. I'm Anna Frazier. I am the Chief People Officer at Sonos. We are a sound experience company. We make smart speakers like the one right behind me here. And I am based in Santa Barbara, California.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today. I think we're in store for a really great conversation. So I'll jump right into it. I'd love for us to kind of set the stage at where we're all at, how we view the Great Resignation. So, I'd love to know, do you see an end in sight, or are we living in a never-ending Great Resignation? Brian.
I think it's actually the great rethink. People are reconsidering what they want from work and from life. The last 2 years have been really hard and a shock to the system to a lot of people, but it's also caused people to reconsider what they want and to kind of recalibrate. what we see in our research, and Future Forum Pulse is this survey instrument, 10,000 office workers around the globe that we survey every quarter for the past 2 years, is a growing desire for flexibility. It's kind of apparent people's expectations around work have changed, not only in terms of the purpose of their organization, not only in terms of career development, but most critically around flexibility in terms of where and importantly when they work. It shows up in our research every single time that we do it. 58%, every quarter, there's a growing number. 58% of people in our survey instrument in Q4 are open to new opportunities. And flexibility in where and when you work is number 2 after compensation. And in fact, if you're not satisfied with the flexibility that your company affords you, that 58% jumps to 72%. So I think we are now living in a world in which people's calibration of what they expected of their employer out of the fact that they've proved themselves to be capable of being productive while working from a wide variety of locations is going to continue to persist. And if you can't deliver that, you're going to lose talent.
Yeah. Jennifer, I'd love to hear your perspective. Are we in a never-ending Great Resignation, or is there an end in sight?
I think I'd +1 to what Brian just said. Not only are we looking at different expectations for what employees are looking for, I think a lot of it's about the relationship as well. So for so long, we've been all kind of operating under this principle that, we all need jobs to survive. So we need companies. And it's really the pandemic and the responses, the crisis responses, that really has woken up a lot of people in realizing, wait, not only do I need the employer, I'm actually realizing as essential workers, as the people that actually are needed to drive profits, the company needs me just as much. So when it comes to our practices in hiring, employee, everything that's employee development, there's a new expectation setting where, because the previous relationship seemed a little bit more one-sided. I'm here because I need a paycheck. I'm here because work is a vehicle. It's become a leverage point for workers to demand more out of their companies and really have it be a two-way relationship. I think it's really exposing the ways that employers have been failing employees and not adapting quickly enough to this world. So to that point, I think it's not, the patterns aren't changing anytime soon. In fact, it's just more of a catch up to all the things that should have been happening before.
Yeah. Zohra, are you seeing that as well at Cisco? Are things, is this the new norm?
Yeah, I think, and again, all the different words and phrases that everyone's using for this thing, I kind of +1 to what Brian and Jennifer said. I think they said it incredibly well, which is, we are seeing it, and we aren't thinking short term on this. We have to change and adapt. I think, Jennifer, what you just said there around, I really feel the employers that are going to win in the future are going to be the employers that do more listening, that, and not just at a company level, but right the way through the organization, leaders that listen, leaders that hear and understand, and are backed from a company perspective around the flexibility that they can provide. And I think that's going to evolve over time. I think what we know now might be different in 6 months' time, and that might be different in a year. And so we have to build this organizational culture of listening, because this is something that I do think is going to stay, and hopefully a positive thing that can come out of it is continued listening and adapting and being realistic about expectations.
Yeah. Anna, I'm curious, is the conversation pretty similar at Sonos as well? What's the conversation like around the Great Resignation?
Yeah, for sure. I think, what we're kind of seeing in this new world of work and way of working is that the pandemic, I think, really accelerated a lot of the trends that we were seeing in the market for the last couple of years and certainly the last decade or two, where, employees want, they want to pursue passion, they want to have impact, they want to work in organizations that are going to develop them, not just give them a paycheck. And so I think, where people are seeing the most opportunity now is where they can find that intersection of, meaningful work, flexibility, and valuing the human, not just the person in the role. And then also, I think a very contemporary and, sometimes, especially in tech, a more progressive approach to things that sometimes aren't thought of in the space of, what you'd look for traditionally with an employer. So I think, as challenging as the last couple of years have been, and the new normal continues to be, I think there have been a lot of really good things that it's planted the seeds for the future.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on the main word that we keep saying. I'm sure I put it in a lot of my articles, is it's challenging. It's a big challenge right now that everyone's facing. And so one thing that we looked at, we published our big, the Great Resignation workplace manual this week. And our lead story, we spoke with Jay Perrick, who's, the co-founder, CEO of Lacework. And, he was saying that the challenge isn't necessarily new, but in his words, he thinks that it's, just a different kind of difficult. So with that in mind, I'm really curious to hear, that different kind of difficult, has anything really changed in terms of the tools that are needed to, recruit and hire right now? Or has nothing really changed at all? Jennifer, do you want to start? You kind of hit on this a little bit.
Oh boy. Yeah, especially, I do think there's a place for tools. I've worked in HR software myself. I do think, though, in general, there's a little bit of an over-reliance for tools to magically solve our problem. When earlier, I believe it was Aaron who mentioned that, so much of this is about strategy and you cannot outsource strategy. So if tools are being evaluated to really supplement your existing strategy and helping you do certain things efficiently, fantastic. If we're using them as a excuse to not do the actual internal work and hoping somebody else will figure it out for us, I think that's unfortunately a way to set ourselves up for failure.
Yeah. I'm curious. How about you next, Zohra? From your perspective, have the rules for how to attract talent, has it changed?
I don't know whether the rules have changed, Amber. I just think what we're seeing certainly is the things that we've always known to be important in how you hire and find the best talent and attract the best talent are just becoming even more important now. And so, great if you've had a head start in practicing some of these things and challenging if you're getting off the starting blocks. A couple of things that we've been fortunate that we've had for a while and are continuing now to double down on because we think they're going to be important. I would say is authenticity in hiring. So I think, a couple of years ago, Jennifer, to your point, everyone was talking about AI bots and how, we're not going to be recruiters anymore because we're all going to do this, in a really different way. And so we're trying to really think about how can you bring that authenticity, because you win the best talent when you're honest about the company culture. And when you're honest about, hey, this is the work you're going to do here, because all those numbers, Aaron did a great job kind of sharing like the number of people that are thinking about moving jobs. That's a ton of work from a hiring perspective. And so, I think what we're going to need to see more of is less of the sell and more of the authenticity in that hiring process, and candidates being confident to say the things that they want to go after, say the things, the career growth, the career development, the things that are really important to them. And companies showing up authentically and not just selling something that doesn't exist. I think that is going to be hypercritical in the next few years and months.
Yeah. Brian, I see you shaking your head. Can you tell me from your vantage point on the Future Forum at Slack, what are you hearing in terms of what are people looking for?
Yeah, so there's a couple things from a company perspective. This shift, creates really sizable opportunities in terms of thinking more broadly about where and how and who you recruit. Meaning, Slack itself was a largely office-based culture company. We were only 3% remote employees prior to the pandemic. Opening up that aperture means you can recruit from a broader and a more diverse population of people. And that's really key. Whether leaders understand it or not, their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals and their future work plans are tied at this point, because we see in our research, there's actually a greater desire for flexibility among racial and ethnic minorities, Black employees, Hispanic, Latinx employees, Asian American employees in the States. Their sense of belonging at work has actually risen over the course of the pandemic. It dropped initially for white office workers and it's come back. But the gaps that we've closed are partly on the basis of people, getting that flexibility and having it. So it's going to be really key to think about, like, not only where am I recruiting people from and how am I bringing them into my organization, but really critically to Zohra's point, leadership has to walk the walk on this one. And so thinking about how your executives show up, how they lead by example. If you say to people that they can have flexibility, they don't need to be in the office all the time, but the executives are all showing up on the executive floor 5 days a week, you're showing something that's different from what you're saying, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on flexibility. That's another big value right now that we're seeing among job candidates and people who are currently employed at companies. They want that flexibility. And so I know, Anna, Sonos has a big focus on intentional flexibility. And I was wondering if you could kind of share with our viewers today, what does that mean and what does that look like at Sonos, that intentional flexibility?
Yeah, so we decided pretty early on in the pandemic that we weren't going to focus on a specific return to office date that we knew we'd have to keep moving as the conditions changed, and we weren't going to kind of make a really big declarative statement about the office is dead, we're going all remote, all hybrid, and we really just used this great reflection moment as a time to step back and look at the way we work and how can we bring more intentionality to that going forward. And so I think our culture has always been really high freedom and really about flexibility. But what we found through the pandemic is that we needed to make the implicit explicit. Like, people were just craving that clarity and that guidance around, tell me, show me what we value, how I can operate in this climate, how I can be successful, how I can stay connected to the culture. And so for us, the intentional flexibility is pretty simple. It just comes down to, what does your role require and where can you be most effective? If that is in the office, great. If that is at home, great. If it's a mix of the two, great. And so, we kind of have a joke that, like, as long as it's legal, you can do it. We can't have people moving to countries where we don't have visas for them and we don't have payroll and whatnot, much as I would like to start the Fiji office. But, we will pretty much, try to make it happen as much as possible. And, what we do ask of our employees is that we are a system, we are an organization and a team. And so there is that intentionality that has to come into play of, what does my job require and how do I have to interact with other people in the system? So while it might work for me to, kind of keep night owl hours, how does that impact the other people that I'm working with? And how do I make that work through, the collaboration tools, the communication tools, and everything that it takes to get my job done? So I think it definitely takes work, but what we really like about it and why we're so committed to it is that it does allow us to put people at the center, which is absolutely our goal. And to Brian's point, it's just provided so much access to great talent that wasn't previously on our radar. Sonos has always been a really distributed culture. We've had kind of dual development across Boston and Santa Barbara and our teams in China. But we were also very office centric. And so by looking at, what we can do beyond the offices, we've just gotten access to so much more talent, hired several new members of the executive team this year who are home-based and are just bringing great experience, diversity, and perspective to Sonos in a way that we wouldn't have been able to look at prior to this model.
Yeah, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Sonos was one of the companies that moved toward geo-neutral pay as well. Am I correct?
I wouldn't say moved. We've maintained it. So we try to make sure that people understand that you will be paid the same for the same role in whatever country you work in. So if you're doing a job in engineering in Boston or Seattle, it's not going to look different than an engineer that we would look at in Atlanta or Austin or elsewhere in the US. And so I think for the talent market, comp doesn't solve everything, but we also didn't want to make that a barrier within our team of, I would like to live in X location because, frankly, it's where my family is, it's where my support network is to help me have, sort of a rich and meaningful life outside of work and be successful at work. But if I move there, I'm going to take, a 10% or a 15% pay cut. And so we didn't want people to be going through that calculus. We want them focused on making great products and experiences.
Yeah, I'm curious, Zohra, from your perspective, we can start with you. Kind of like Anna said, comp doesn't solve everything these days, but tech workers do have way more bargaining power than ever. So I'm curious from your perspective, how can you lock down great talent without maybe, busting your compensation budget or having to adjust an entire team's pay structure? Are there other effective ways of negotiating right now. What else do you see that's of interest to hires and employees that maybe wasn't of interest 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a tough question, right? Because with rising inflation in parts of the world, right, it's hard, and you have to acknowledge the pay piece, right? Because it is important. First off, I'll say I really loved what Aaron said at the top of this conversation around internal movement, right? Because I think there is a ton we can do that really starts to talk about like the career development piece, right? So other than compensation, I think career development and explaining to somebody why a next move or why a certain role or why a certain exposure is going to help them in that breadth of experience. Somebody said it very articulately. It's not just about upward movement. It's about the movement that rounds you out as a person. And leaders need to know how to have those career conversations. So we have career conversations at Cisco twice a year. It isn't an ask, but essentially at any point, constantly asking our leaders, check in with your teams, check in with your individuals, and understand what is it that they want to get in that next step. Is it formal education? Is it exposure? Is it experience? And making sure that is available constantly, because we need to sometimes help individuals see what that bigger career story is, and help them understand that the movement or the role that they're in is playing into that. The other thing I'll say, Amber, is purpose. It's a thing I'm doing contributing to something bigger that I'm proud of. Is the thing I'm doing cool? Is the thing I'm doing important work? And I think it's really important that we talk to employees about purpose, because again, you might be okay with not moving a company to make more money because the company you're currently at has got a really cool purpose and you're excited about it, and you're doing work that gets to that purpose. I think we need to do a better job of being more articulate as a society around what is the work you're doing and what's the purpose and what's the outcome of it.
Yeah, the communicating purpose so that people know before they even enter the organization is something that I've been hearing as well in interviews. So that's really fascinating to hear again. And so I'm wondering, Jennifer is also in that unique spot in which she is talking to startup founders every single day who are grappling with this question as well. And so I'd love to know, the companies that are doing it right, what are they doing to, recruit and hold on to employees? What are they doing well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, building upon this purpose factor that Zohra just mentioned, the parallel concept that I talk a lot about with these early stage startups is motivation fit. So whenever it comes to deciding where to work, there's always going to be a number of factors that go into an equation. But broadly, there's the tangible category and then the intangible. The tangible ones are the, compensation, title, the brand of the company, much more well-known, easy to grasp. The intangibles are the sense of purpose, the sense of team that you get, camaraderie, that can't be quite as easily quantified or even just pointed to. But in any situation, especially in startups, but in any situations, your job is to figure out what is the offer that you're making as an employer and finding the right people to take that offer. I talk to a lot of startups that are, competing for talent against the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Googles of the world. And of course, they will be able to outcompete these offers in terms of the tangibles. They can throw a lot more money than these early stage startups can. However, your job is to not then try to compete on their strengths and their playing field, but really be identifying and talking to the people who want what you are offering, who want that exciting sense of growth, being part of something new, maybe that opportunity to really fast track your career by signing up for a high pressure environment. Not everyone's going to want that. Some people do want the more tangible parts of organizations, but it's your job as an employer to figure out what are your strengths, what are you offering, and how do you walk away when certain conversations, when you realize, oh, this candidate is actually looking for something that we are not offering. We don't have to waste our time here. Therefore, we will continue to focus on building our tribe, our talent team, and that takes some discipline, takes some, learning how to say no to things.
Yeah, Brian, I see you shaking your head. Do you have any thoughts on, what the companies are doing right, the ones who are getting it right? Are you seeing some of these same trends?
We are. So I'll touch on a few things that come out of our research in terms of not necessarily attracting talent, but retaining talent. Aaron touched on this in the introductory comments, right? Retaining the people that you've got, the talent that you've got is far more productive than having to replace them and attract new talent. One. So besides flexibility, there's three other key factors that we see in research. One is investing in new ways of working. So companies that have invested in being on the leading edge, that are actually early adopters of new technology and new tools, have steadily outpaced those that haven't over the course of the past 2 years, not only in terms of things like productivity, but in terms of sense of belonging among their employees. And that sense of belonging is really critical. Second factor is transparency. And Zohra touched on this in one of her early comments also. But the two-way street between your leadership and your employees is really critical these days. The old executive memorandum that gets passed down saying, here's what our future of work plans, just doesn't work. It doesn't land well. People expect to be involved and understand why you're making the decisions that you are. And we see a 2x differential between people who are at companies where they believe that their leadership is being transparent with them, where there's some engagement and involvement that they have with the planning process, not only on future of work, but in terms of what they're doing, versus those that don't. If you don't believe your company's being transparent, you're twice as likely to leave. If they are being transparent with you and you believe that, you're twice as likely to say you're excited about the future of the company, which means, by the way, you're going to tell your friends. Third factor that comes out pretty clearly is burnout. And this is probably the most challenging thing for a lot of people to deal with, because the challenge that everyone is facing is, as turnover has increased, are you really, while you replace somebody, are you being clear about what the priorities are? And are you not expecting the team to pick up the load of those that left? That burnout factor really drives some key retention issues if you're not careful. So investing in rethinking how work gets done, two-way street of transparency, and being realistic about the workload are all going to be critical factors for retaining the people that you've got.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of go with that thread and talk a little bit more about, what's keeping employees at their companies. And, there's a lot of reporting on the effects of benefits in, providing really engaging benefits for your employees and the role that they play. There's, the famous stat from Maven Clinic and Great Place to Work. And, they say organizations that were perceived as offering, those special and unique benefits are twice as likely to retain their working parents. So, we talk about parental benefits, but it goes kind of across the board. So I'm wondering, when it comes to providing premium and competitive benefits, even though they're expensive, is it critical to retention, and is it worth the investment right now? Zohra, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do actually. I think, and I talk to our head of benefits a lot, right, about this, and we're constantly looking at, do you need to tweak? Do we need to change? How do you react? And again, I'll say what I said earlier on, which is it's about listening. It's about understanding, what are the most important benefits to an individual, because, Generation Z entering the workplace, like, it's going to be different to everybody. We've got so many generations in the workforce. One employee might be super hyped up about 401k matching, and another person wants to know, hang on, how am I going to look after my really young kids, right? So I think we have to listen and understand what that looks like. Some of the benefits, your point, that the cool benefits, right? I think they've got to play into or tie into, and Brian, you said it, right? This really new phenomenon about mass scale burnout and things like that those well-being benefits. I don't think they are, kind of cool benefits. I think they're core benefits. I think they're really necessary benefits. And I think we have to really shift our thinking about how we, apply that. So, one of the things we have at Cisco is every employee every year has 45 days paid critical time off. You don't use PTO for a crisis, right? So right now, obviously, with what's happening in Ukraine, we've got a lot of employees who are given the grace to go and do what they need to do to take care of people, take care of family members, take care of colleagues, family members. And that's really important. And so I think you have to listen to say, well, what is it? What's hard for people right now? And is that, a form of a gym membership, or is it time off to deal with a critical situation because our lives are so busy now that feels like, something that's going to be really important going forward. So I'd say we have to listen. And again, to my other point, it's going to change, right? It's going to change over the next 1, 2, and 3 years. We have to keep on listening.
Yeah, Anna, I'm curious. I saw you shaking your head as well. What's the conversation around benefits like at Sonos, and how are you all talking about the value of them at this point?
Yeah, I'll pick up where Zohra left off on change, because I think that's one of the trickiest things in the benefit space, and anything employee facing is, we know that the external climate, the context within the company is always changing, but it's so hard to change things that employees get used to, especially if it's something that's perceived as a takeaway. So I think that's one of the risks in where companies might be afraid to try things or to adjust. And so we're just trying to do our best to stay as agile as possible and really listen to what people need now. So one of the things we had to do early on in the pandemic, when we were going through some cost reduction measures and just really trying to look at our spending, is we had to stop some benefits that people really loved. Like, we did have a physical wellness subsidy that people could use at sort of the gym or the class of their choice. And we had to cut back on our discretionary spending, but we also were able to really quickly add this concept that we call care time, of early on in the pandemic, when people were just trying to figure out, like, how do I find toilet paper and groceries and the things that, now take 10 times as long to do as they did in my day-to-day life. And we just said, everyone can take the time they need every week. If it's during normal working hours, that's fine. But just block it off as care time. You get up to 10 hours a week to just live your life, take care of yourself, take care of somebody else in your family or your network. And, we will trust that you know what you need to do to get your work done. And it was so, I think, freeing for our people to know that we were recognizing that, they had needs that were preoccupying them outside of work, and that we were going to give them the time and space to do it. And it didn't cut into vacation or anything like that. We also, during the pandemic, we actually shifted from, a sort of tenure-based vacation policy that's pretty traditional to an open time off policy in the US. So any employee can take whatever time off makes sense for them, just, working with their manager. And so for us, it was really kind of rooted in this notion that, like, we want people to take a break. We want them to rest and to recharge. And we do try to model that from the top. Like, we make sure our leaders are taking time off and letting their teams know it's okay to take time off, and building it into to product cycles and whatnot. And so, but you have to work at it. It's not gonna happen on its own. And so, I think just going into it with that learning mindset and that agility, that, we are going to keep trying things, and we're probably going to keep changing things as context changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one kind of benefit that I'm hearing a lot about, that's kind of always been there, but the nature of it has changed as well, is, those upskilling, reskilling, ed tech sort of benefits. And I know, Brian, you all have tracked a lot that has to do with this. So I'd love to start with you, but what role does this reskilling, kind of like Aaron was speaking about earlier, what role does reskilling play in retention and in keeping people from walking out the door?
Yeah, this is actually related. I liked a lot of what Anna was saying about some of the benefits and making sure that you understand what's permanent and what's going to last. Things like mental health and wellness benefits are actually great. And one of the bright spots out of the course of the pandemic is we sort of destigmatized mental health and well-being as topics that are okay at work. At the same time, one of the biggest things that you can do for people is frontline manager training. So frontline managers, first-time managers, they're some of the people that have been the most stressed for years, honestly, for decades, but also over the course of the pandemic, because most people have not been trained to lead distributed teams. And most managers really haven't been invested in enough, period. A lot of companies have been increasing their rate of investment, but thinking through things that are critical, like how do you help a manager learn to lead on the basis of outcomes as opposed to attendance and hours worked? What's it mean to be a good social, emotional leader of teams or bringing people together? Slack has a program called Bootcamp that we've had for the past few years that's been a fantastic example on this. But it was an early investment in new managers that was really essential to make them feel more comfortable and capable. That really makes a big difference, not only in their lives, but in the lives of their teams. It's kind of back to the old saying, People don't leave companies, they leave managers. And if you can help invest in them, then you stand a really good chance of making everything else work really well.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on this from your viewpoint?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot of startups really wake up to having to get a lot more creative and not just the default, not just kind of the lazy, like, oh, we don't want to deal with recruiting. We're busy building product. So therefore, you make a lot of shortcuts and you copy what you've seen. So I think there's a lot of questioning around, do you really want to be offering the same benefits that everyone else has been doing, which might have worked at a different time, which might have worked when the top type of population that was interested in early stage startups was a lot more homogeneous than it is today. So, a little bit less maybe laundry services and ping pong tables, as a cliche goes, and a little bit more things like, what are people looking for from more diverse backgrounds, whether that's caretaking duties or older generations to mental health services, for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on that, because I was just about to ask, will the ping pong tables bring people back to the office? But you answered that. And Brian says no, everyone says no. So I think it's unanimous. I feel like we can't have this conversation without also touching on, the role of DEI in the Great Resignation. And so I know that, Jennifer, this is part of you all's training that you all do for your startups. What is the conversation, and what role does DEI play in terms of recruiting and holding on to really high skilled tech talent right now?
Yeah, and I know, I'm sure we could do a whole different separate panel on diversity, equity, and inclusion alone, but it really has taken center stage. And yet I do find that there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what DEI is. I think given the events of the last few years, the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, that was a very reactive moment in some ways. And while it was very important, I do think that the misconception around DEI is that it's a purely reactionary or a crisis moment, as opposed to what it truly is, which is an approach to really looking at everything that you do as a business in making sure you're prepared for working with a much more diverse workforce, being able to see around corners because you have a lot different skill sets, but also working with a lot more diverse customer set. So one example I'll give around hiring specifically is that, instead of DEI being looked at as like a, charity effort, like how can we do this for the women or the minorities, but really realizing DEI is a forcing function for making sure your hiring processes are working for everybody. An example of this might be, let's say in your attempt to hire a very highly skilled technical workforce, part of your interview process includes a really long, kind of cumbersome take-home assignment that takes several hours to do. Here, you might end up seeing a difference in who is actually available and succeeds on that test. And what you're doing is, by building this into your process, you're measuring who is available, who has a time to complete this assignment, as opposed to who is actually going to make for a great fit in your organization that has the skills to do so. So maybe unsurprisingly, you might think that it's the people with caregiving duties, people who are not just 23-year-olds without any kind of other typical responsibilities that end up doing well on these tests. And then other people from other underrepresented backgrounds drop out. So it's really critical for companies to realize that doesn't mean like, oh, I guess the people from underrepresented backgrounds are just not a good fit for us. It means your process needs to be worked through. So DEI really as a way of making sure it's informing what you're doing. It's informing what inefficiencies in your process exist. And by paying attention to the experiences of underrepresented groups, they're giving you clues to what can be improved upon which actually everyone will benefit. Because as a company scales, it's not just let's say underrepresented groups like caregivers who end up dropping out. Eventually, it's the people from majority groups, let's say a cisgender white man, who will also look at a 12-hour test and say, I don't want to do this either. It's just that we missed out on the opportunity to fix this earlier by not paying attention to the DEI experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else that came to mind while you were speaking is that, the hiring tests are a big part, but also we're seeing a lot in data that, a lot of underrepresented groups are saying, hey, I'm really enjoying, for instance, working in more of a hybrid or remote space, or I feel like I can bring more of myself to working this way. And so I know, Brian, you all have done a lot of looking at, the hybrid versus, remote, and just looking at what people want in general. But what role does that play right now, if that makes sense? What role is hybrid and remote playing in this equity that we're searching for?
Yeah, flexibility plays a key role. It's not going to solve by any stretch of the imagination our problems around inclusivity, but it can certainly help. So what we see consistently over the course of the past 2 years is that Black employees, Hispanic, Latinx employees, Asian American employees want more flexibility than their white counterparts. They're more likely. This is not people that are sitting on the opposite poles. I want to be fully remote. But they don't want to be 5 days a week in the office. They want time together with their teams. And when we dug into it, sense of belonging that grew over the course of the past 2 years, especially among Black employees and Hispanic Latinx employees, is in part because you reduce the costs of code switching and the impact of microaggressions at work that are in a continuous work environment. And if we can preserve some of that, it's really critical. The other key issue is, we talk a lot about location flexibility. Schedule flexibility is even more important to everyone. And it's really critical, especially to caregivers. And we've seen consistently, especially in the US and in the UK, women with children more than men with children value schedule flexibility, and they value it for caregiving, for the needs that they've got at home. And so this shift to more flexible ways of working is a real opportunity. The risk we run as people start coming back in the fourth quarter, this is the first time that we saw, majority of teams operating in hybrid mode, is that people coming back into the office are more often the executives, they are white office workers, they are men, and they are non-parents. And so we run the risk that proximity bias, presenteeism, does real damage in terms of the potential not only for diversity, but inclusion of teams. So we end up doing a lot of work with companies talking about what are your principles and what are your guardrails that you're putting in place, because it's really essential that leaders sort of lead by example. At Slack, we put in speed limits. Executives agreed among themselves they wouldn't come into the office more than 3 days a week. And even things like, how do you run that product review meeting? Keeping that in this kind of mode, in a Zoom call where everybody's dialed in and on a level playing field, is really essential. Our CTO and Chief Product Officer, Tamar Yehoshua, moved all of their review meetings to all Zoom all the time, basically, as a way of making sure that you didn't have this pressure for people to show up in the office in order to be, quote unquote, in the room where it happens, and feeling it that way. In fact, they don't even book a conference room. The other thing that I'd say on this is back to this topic of reskilling your managers. The other thing that creates a level playing field is making sure you're measuring people on the basis of outcomes. And we have to invest in managers to give them the skills to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you hit on that, because that's huge, especially when it comes to, getting people to stay around. We've said it before, but sometimes people don't leave companies, they leave their managers. And so I think that's a really interesting point to think about. We're getting toward the end of the time, but one question that I do want us to end on is, there is no one solution to all of us solving the challenges associated with the Great Resignation. But I would like to know if there's one thing that you were to tell, someone to invest in to help attract and hold on to their employees, what would it be? And just as an example, I guess I would say, do we give all employees 4-day work weeks? Is that going to keep people from resigning? Zohra, how about we start with you?
Well, funny, Amber, we are piloting and doing a very small pilot for the 4-day work week at Cisco right now. So I think that's what I would say is pilot, try. I think that's the thing that's going to be really critical. Like, we don't know, is this going to be wildly successful, or are we going to learn something about how it needs to be different? Super open-minded about how we're thinking about that, because let's try it, listen, get the feedback, understand, adapt it, make it ours if we need to. But I think that's going to be the thing is companies, and my advice would be try different things, try them, but don't be afraid to pilot, don't be afraid to try things out. with a view that it may not work, right? So we started with this pilot communication, and everyone's like, we're moving to a 4-day work week. We're like, no, we're piloting it and holding space to try and say, we might not get this right. It might not work, but we're okay with that because we want to try it. So being brave and trying things, I think, would be the thing I would say.
Brian, what do you think?
I would just love to build on Zohra's answer, which I think is fantastic. Having a learning mindset is really critical, and that's often hard for executives and leaders because they've been trained in things like seldom wrong, never in doubt, something I had to unlearn myself. So being able to say, I don't have all the answers, but we're going to figure them out together is really critical. And that goes back to transparency in this sort of two-way street of communication. As a leader, it's actually now your job to involve your team to get together a group of people that are representative across functions, across geographies, across demographics, to understand what's working and what's not. Find the people, and there are those in your company, that want to try new things, that want to experiment, that will be your champions. Leverage them, reward them, celebrate them, and use them to help figure out what the right path is to move forward for your organization, because everyone is different.
Yeah, Anna, I see you shaking your head. Any final thoughts? What's the one thing that you would suggest that people invest in?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a combination of what Zohra and Brian both hit on, in that it's really about vulnerability, and particularly leaders showing up with that vulnerability, because I think, we do need to be agile and try things, and not all of them are going to work, and we need to build that adaptability in the culture. And we also need to, open ourselves up in that way that people, especially in a virtual environment, in a distributed global team, people can have those moments to connect with one another, connect with leaders in those very authentic and transparent ways, because it's not going to be, going and grabbing a coffee together or beer together all the time. You have to, find those ways for people to truly, be vulnerable and get to know one another in a way that's going to drive that connection and that purpose to the organization as a whole.
Great. And Jennifer, you get to wrap it up for us. What's that one thing that you would advise your startup founders to invest in? Should they give everyone that 4-day work week?
Oh boy, that is a very contentious topic in startups. Not even going to touch that one. But with specifically hiring, I think it's a lot more about recognizing this power redistribution that's happening, and really moving away from the old mindset, which is like, well, we just need more candidates. We just need more candidates to come to us. And it's not working anymore. So it's not just about filling that top of funnel pipeline, but actually look at your process. Where are people dropping out? Before we look to just kind of stuff the pipeline more, let's figure out where in your process, pick one area, figure out why people are leaving, why it's inefficient, which then also means you have to make sure your recruiters are resourced. You can't just demand that they magically find more time to do this work. So yeah, really along the themes of pick something, try it out. And it's honestly very useful to hear from you, Zohra. I can now tell my startup founders, look, if a company as big as Cisco can try things, so can you.
I definitely took that insight away too. I'm sure my editors will hate that I'm bringing that back. But thank you all for joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I know that our viewers did as well. These are wonderful insights on a problem that we're continuing to keep an eye on. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll continue to talk about the subject.
Thanks, Amber.